Welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at the NM20, which is done by the brand formerly known as NF Audio, now known as NF ACOUS, or I guess that's short for NF Acoustics. But this NM20 is going to be the launch of their new branding and their new name, so very important for them. It's also a continuation of their NM2 series, so a very important part of their Pro series. So all of this is very important to them, so we'll kind of step through what's here and what's in the box. So this is the outer box here, very nicely done, nice color. On the inside, you are going to get the 1/4-inch adapter, which is pretty handy, especially if you are using a desktop amp or a musician and you only use 1/4 inches as opposed to 3.5. Cable is SPC. So again, this set is part of their professional series, so you are going to expect a thinner cable, a nice thin twisted cable. This is more comfortable if you're moving on stage or you're monitoring. You don't really need a really thick, heavy, ropey cord to do that. I think the thinner style is definitely more along the lines of the professional series. You are going to get a case, and you are going to get their MS42 silicone tip. So all of this, if you are familiar with the previous NF audio sets, this should all look quite familiar. They do this kind of fold-out style packaging, and they've done that in the past, and they're going to continue that with their new branding. So we'll slide these things out of the way and take a closer look at the NM20. So I think one of the things that's sort of noticeable right off the bat is they did a slight restyle on the shell. They now have an aluminum ring around the edge. And the rest of it, I mean, I think the shell shape and the size of it are kind of, very similar to previous NF audio sets. They tend to do these really small, very compact, really nice fitting sets, and the NM20 is no different. So you can kind of see it says NM20 monitor. But, I think what was important was they had this new aluminum ring, and the interior is actually really all new. So it is a brand new beryllium plated driver. It has a new tuning PCB on the back, and they added some acoustic. There's a change to the acoustic structure, which we can't really get a good look at here. But as they launch it and you see the marketing, you'll see some of the changes that they did there. And part of the marketing will be a better looking graph. I apologize for the graph that is here, but the squid graph, my measurement of it doesn't really reflect what it sounds like or what it should look like. This is one of their version of their graph. When there's actual a listing for the set, you'll see a kind of more comprehensible or a more comprehensible version of the graph, so you can actually see and get a closer look at it. But for now, I'll kind of walk through the graph in a second. But we'll start with what is it? What is the NM20? And it's definitely the latest in the series of NF Acoustics professional lineage, starting with the NM2 through the NM2 Plus. This is the NM20. And what's different about this one, again, like I said, it's a new beryllium plated dynamic driver. They redesigned the tuning PCB on the back and the acoustic structures. So essentially a set that is familiar to previous customers, but a lot of redesign to make it a better set, the upgrade, the one that is worthy of launching it with the new branding and all of this. So very important set to them. So we will take a quick look at the graph now, and I'll say that just by doing a review, a graph by or a review by graph, we'll kind of look at the bass. And if you look really closely here, the sub bass is actually tilted down a little bit. Again, along the lines of this monitoring professional use, you don't want this big boomy bass, so this does tilt down. It does give you sub bass kind of extension, but you don't have that boominess that would be quite unnatural for stage presentation or monitoring. You do get a nice amount of mid bass, and that is going to be for the body. And like I said, this one is going to be more of a vocal centric. If you're familiar with the other NM2 series, they are very vocal centric. So this little bit right here, that is going to be brought forward. It is emphasized. That's what the meat of this sound and the lineage of this set is. It's a lot of this vocal emphasis, vocal forward. That's exactly what's have here. But they added enough mid bass over here to basically fill in the bottom end of that, so you get the proper weighting and body for the vocal. So I do think that this is a much better, more musical version, a better weighting, a more natural version of the vocals. I think previously they were really, really good at emphasizing the vocals, and they brought them really forward, but they tended to be a little bit lighter in weight and kind of sounds a little bit unnatural. for music, but for monitoring, it was probably perfect. And I think their engineers kind of know what they're doing. So I think this was actually a really nice trade off of just adding a little bit more body and then putting that right under their typical vocal emphasis. And then they roll off the treble in a sort of natural, non-distracting way, so you don't have a lot of air or sibilance or anything else that is going to get in the way of your professional use. And it actually sounds pretty good with music as well. And I'll talk about all these things over again, so don't get too caught up on the graph, because we'll revisit a lot of those things, and we'll revisit some of them right now. So the things that are really harder to glean from the squid graphs, and you can certainly take a look at my measurement, but it looks super peaky. And I think NF Acoustics, they've always had this point of view, and they would call it the professional monitoring usage, stage and live monitoring of vocal-centric tuning. I mean, there's no doubt that the meat of their sound is right there in the ear gain area and that lower treble. That's always what they've done in this series. And NM20 is really no different. It just sounds a little bit more musical. I think it's a little bit more general appealing. I found it quite pleasant to listen to. The squid graphs, if you look at mine, it looks super peaky, too much upper treble. Really, it looks like a very low volume style tuning, but it really isn't in your ear. So it's quite misleading if you look at the other graphs. That's why I didn't actually post it. But yeah, don't pay too much attention to the squid graph. Take a look at the graph that they are going to post in the listing, which will be a cleaned up version of this one. So it does look like it's quite bass boosted as well. It looks like there's quite a bit of mid bass there, and that's really for balance. And the arcing down sub bass and the extra mid bass, they're really right on for this tuning. Again, you get that body without the boom, and the sound of this is that's a lot of it. Is they really added a really nice amount of body and weight to the vocals, but without the sub bass boom that you may get on some Harman style sets that you're more familiar with. So yeah, I sort of understand their tuning. And this style tuning, this bass shelf, this treble shelf, I think all of that contributes to a better version of what they've been doing for many years. So the sound, these aren't enough clean and clear. There aren't enough clean and clear single dynamic drivers. This one is very clean and clear. So yeah, I just kind of botched that line pretty well. But yeah, they're really, when you look at the $100 and over single dynamic drivers, there really aren't enough of them that approach the bass shelf in this way. So you're presented with very clean and clear mids and vocals. And so you're getting a very clean, clear mid vocals, and then they pop it in forward. And it's a very interesting combination, the way they do that. And for me, it was a very pleasant change to hear this. The tuning really creates that vocal separation, which is not typical, and is really supported by the bass and that relaxed upper treble. And for monitoring, I like the upper treble shelf very much. It reduces the noise. It keeps the vocal focus. It's basically the analog of the bass shelf and the lowered sub bass. So everything that I just said about the sub bass, how they lowered this arcs down into the sub bass, so it's not boomy, it's not distracting. You essentially get the same exact thing that happens in the treble. So you don't have this crazy boost at 15K like some Harman sets do to get over the sub bass. You don't really need that. So you can actually arc this down in a very natural way. So you're getting a lot of extension, but without the unnatural, distracting boost that some sets have been doing lately. So yeah, 100% agree with what they did on both ends. I think it fits really, really well with the tuning and the use that they were really going for. So the bass, again, I really like this bass style. It's more mid bass centric as opposed to sub bass, as we just talked about. Definitely not for bass heavy genres. It's kind of a tighter, cleaner bass style, but for everything else, I think it works really well. And it does offer a really natural level of body and really leaves a very dark background to the mids that pop and engage. And again, this is one of these things that's really hard to see on the graph, but lowering the sub bass and you don't have that persistent droning sub bass in the background, it gives you very, very nice, clean, clear mids. And again, a lot of this clean and clear sound is going to be because of the mid bass. The bass shelf is done very, very well for this particular driver. So what is hard to tell from the graph, I think the bass actually does rise properly with volume. So it doesn't behave like a low volume set where the treble rises too fast or faster than the bass. And I think that was one issue. And I sort of said that because of some of their previous sets, the NM2 and the NM2 Plus, they have kind of the same bump here, but it was kind of hard to achieve the balance at higher volumes. Those were really, really vocal focused. And like I said, this one sort of branches out and it still does vocal focus, but not at the expense of the bass and the treble. I think this one is really a really nice balance. So I thought it was kind of a small but important point to point out. And the mids, I think the bass sets up those lower mids with a little bit extra mid bass. Like I said, that just gives you the right amount of body, but the lack of extra sub bass is really more noticeable if you are a Harman fan. Again, I'll say that this tilting down of the sub bass, and you don't have that boom, you don't have that persistent sub bass, it really leaves you with a really nice, dark, rich, full sounding mid. It's done really, really well here as well. And why do the mids sound so clean and transparent? Because you're hearing the background. There's no extra bass clouding up the mids. And the lower is really quite clean and weighted. Like I said, the upper hits that extra vocal focus and it really pops forward. That gives you even more clarity and separation from the bass and the treble. Again, these two in combination work really, really well. So they pop this forward like they've done in the past. They support the underneath it, the lower end of the vocals. The fullness that you're going to get from your vocals is a lot of it right there. So again, really, really smart tuning choices for the use case that they are trying to achieve. This really vocal-centric stage monitoring style, but it also does work really well for just typical music because you're listening to the same thing. So the treble, I do think NF Acoustics really found the better balance. It's still lower heavy. It's still, very much a lower heavy set. But why does the upper treble work? Again, there's just no extra sub bass to mask and there's no extra boost. It can still be heard, and that does add to the mids properly. I think they found the balance that sounds enjoyable, but still works for monitoring. Again, I'll say that it's kind of on the past sets. You had a whole lot of this. You couldn't really hear this because this was so sharp. It was quite unforgiving at higher volume. And this balance, I think, actually got it right. And maybe it's the new driver, maybe it's the new acoustic structures that they use or the new foam, whatever they used. I think they actually found the right balance of letting people use it for stage monitoring, but it still sounds quite enjoyable and still musical. And again, I think it's just the right balance of all of that. So, but is it still a bit intense? I mean, I think this is still a little bit intense. And I think the answer is you still need to either use their tips, use your own tips. I think this will be, especially if you are at higher volume, that is still going to be a little bit intense. And it's, you have to remember, it's still the professional series, right? It is still the pro series. It is still designed to really pop those forward, and that is supposed to grab all of your attention. So if that, sort of bothers you find it too intense, to play with the tips. And on the stage, again, it was sort of my first indication that the squid grass were quite off on this one. It does stage much better than the grass would indicate. Again, a lot of it is the sub bass and upper treble, these two in combination. This isn't masking this, so you can actually hear quite a bit of upper treble that will give you kind of a bigger sound stage, and that's exactly what happens. There's no sub bass clouding that up. You do have some mid bass to give you some depth, and they move the ear gain kind of slightly over to the right, which was the right move. So instead of having an ear kind of a stage flattening 2K, they've actually slid it over closer to 3K. That will always stage a little better because it's not so shouty. And again, really, really small tuning decisions that, in the overall picture of how this sounds, just really, really right choices. So yeah, lots of small correct decisions done on the NM20. So that's what I got. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.